Ray Dalio, the founder of the world's largest hedge fund firm, Bridgewater Associates, has predicted the collapse of the American economy. We are at a risk of some kind of civil war. These are the words that Ray Dalio said during one of his interviews and how he has outlined how the economy is failing. Emotions never change despite the continuous innovation of humanity, and since humanity is prone to predictability, the economy runs in cycles. Welcome to Empire Investing, where we'll be sharing the latest in stock market news, technology, and innovative investment strategies for aspiring millionaires and billionaires. If this is your first time watching our channel, please consider subscribing to see more videos just like this. And now let's get started. Ray Dalio is closely watching three main indicators as to why he thinks the US will be facing another economic downturn. First is the division of the wealth and opportunity gap in the United States. Although the U.S. household wealth increased throughout the years, as you can see in this graph, most of the wealth is distributed amongst the upper class. Over the past 3 decades, the top 10% has increased their wealth in the U.S. and now owns 70% of it. And in recent data, the top 1%'s wealth has increased to 27% of the total wealth. On paper, this would indicate that our economy is thriving. However, what makes this alarming is the gap from the upper class with the lower economic classes. This is evident with the current political polarization heightened further by the pandemic. This creates an internal disorder, which is one of the key factors of the country's economic downturn. Second is the growing U.S. government debt. Aside from politics, the pandemic also affected the U.S. debt, which has closed at almost $29 billion in 2021. That's 2 times more than it was 8 years ago. To fight back the pandemic, the government continues to spend enormous amounts of money despite its massive debt problem. If the Build Back Better bill had been passed, it would have cost $1.9 trillion. Joe Manchin's vote against the bill prevented it from becoming law. Although the Build Back Better Act did not pass, the Federal Reserve is doing nothing to help the inflationary pressure. Currently, interest rates are at 0%, but the Federal Reserve is expected to raise rates in the near future. All of this is taking place as inflation soars to levels that it can no longer be described as quote-unquote transient. Last is the economic race between China and the US in becoming the most powerful world power. China has become more competitive economically over the past years, and according to the CEBR World Economic League, they predicted that China's GDP will surpass the US's in the next decade. This was also discussed in a book written by Dalio called Principles for Dealing with a Changing World Order. According to Dalio, there are 3 cycles that are converging right now. Number 1, long-term debt and capital market cycle. Number 2, the cycle of internal order and disorder. And number 3, the cycle of external order and disorder. These 3 cycles have been evident throughout history, mainly in the Dutch, British, and Chinese empires. The perfect example for this is when the Dutch invented the first stock market. This invention prospered, however, it created a wealth gap between the economic classes. Only the richest people can afford education and have the best opportunities. They also built ships to allow them to share their currency and become other countries' reserve currency, which is a country's effort to protect themselves if ever their own currency fails. However, complacency got the best of the Dutch Empire as time went on. This caused the Dutch to have less work ethic, have a higher cost of living, and produce goods at more expensive rates. To stay afloat with new countries at the time, such as the UK, they were forced to acquire an enormous amount of debt, which led to their downfall. And the reason I say that is because I've studied these empires, these dynasties, going back since the last 500 years, and you see the same thing happening over and over again. When there's a financial problem, when the granaries are empty and the coffers are empty, they print money, and when they print money and the coffers are empty, it devalues money. Ray Dalio. According to Dalio, the U.S. is at, quote, risk of some kind of civil war. When there's a large gap of people created by the divide of the economic classes, what happened to the empires before is going to happen again for the United States. When the other countries surrendered to the US after World War II, the US became the leading world power. This brought peace globally, and the countries were able to work together towards economic prosperity. However, this is when the wealth gap started to increase. Now, back to our current situation, the United States, being the leading world power, is now in danger as China is ahead of them in several metrics, such as financials, currency power, internal disorder, and education. And when we talk about US financials, the US Treasury bonds are in a huge bubble that's about to burst. Investors in the 10-year Treasury bills are losing more than what they receive due to the inflation rate of over 6%. And Dalio believes that the Fed can now either raise interest rates in order to counter inflation or keep the economy running and print more money. Now, these two choices are incredibly risky because it will negatively affect the US dollar's purchasing power. If that happens, another currency might take over and incur financial power instability. There's also internal disorder, which is another major concern in the United States. The internal tension, just like Dalio says, can lead to a civil war, which could be beneficial if it leads to a productive civil war and product revolutionary changes. However, with the current political situation, a civil war might do more harm than actual good. There's also education. Dalio talks about the deterioration of the U.S. educational advantage compared to China. This is evident in both of the countries' test scores. China is focused on improving their education system, which could be positive. However, Ray Dalio says otherwise. According to Dalio, although the US has the upper hand in having most of the best universities in the world, the education in China is moving rapidly, and the resources they're putting behind it is much greater. Not only that, in terms of technologies, China is in the lead in some areas in technology as well. This is what he predicts could signal the collapse of the US economic empire, and the risk is not because of China, it's also because of the internal conflict within the United States itself. There are some areas that China's in the lead, but China's gaining very quickly. When I first went to China in 1984, I would bring $10 calculators, and I gave them away as gifts to high-ranking people, and they thought they were miracle devices. Right now, in terms of areas like quantum computing and AI and many areas, you have a race going on. And so if you take the trajectory of the competitiveness, not just look at the current level, you have a situation where they're improving at a much faster rate. This is all good for the world if the world can get along. And the main thing I think is, how do you have a healthy world, and how do you have a strong economy, and how do you have a strong situation is to be strong. The United States' war is with itself. Ray Dalio. And that's all for today. What are your thoughts on Ray Dalio's prediction about the United States and China? Join the discussion in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, please do click that like and subscribe button. We'll see you guys in the next video.